All right. Hi, Jacques. I am really
Hi.
excited. I'm excited to have you on the podcast. We met through LinkedIn, and I think we have really similar interests around comms and AI. And you're doing some really great work around training comms and public affairs teams around AI and AI upskilling. So I'm really excited to hear more about your work and what brought you to it and how it's going and everything. But yeah, could you introduce yourself and talk about what got you to this work?
Sure. So my name is Jacques Foul. I'm sort of an independent consultant. I help teams, better manage their time, think more strategically about communications. And lately, I've been really interested in how AI is helping us work better, work smarter, and maybe even work faster at the same time. And so I think at first it started as everybody, just like everybody is doing it at the moment, is basically just using AI for my day-to-day work. And then I sort of saw the opportunity just by saving time, working more or, writing more clearly, finding ways to use it to basically think more strategically in our work. And I just posted things online on LinkedIn, and this is where you probably saw some of my posts, and somebody reached out to me. This person became then my business partner, and we decided to just start training people in public affairs and communications on how to use AI, because we saw that there was a gap in the market because we did a lot of AI trainings before, and they were just very technical, very theoretical. And so we just wanted to bring something a little bit more practical that people can actually use straight away after the workshops. And so we started creating these workshops. First, they were free, and then we made them available for people who wanted to pay for them eventually at some point. And we saw a growing interest in that. So anywhere from public affairs to communications, anywhere from European institutions to NGOs to companies. So we started really giving these trainings and seeing a lot of value from them. And so this is how we got started with AI trainings, basically.
Yeah, no, that's so awesome. Can you talk a bit about how the work has evolved? Because I see you all are constantly doing different workshops. You do a lot of in-person ones, right?
We do a bunch of different workshops, mostly in person, but sometimes it's online, sometimes it's hybrid. We just sort of tailor these sessions to whatever the clients are looking for, but we see the most value in in-person workshops, definitely.
Yeah, and I've had this conversation with some other folks who are interested in comms and AI, and we talk about how you create a useful workshop for like a medium-sized group of people that is really beneficial and meets people where they're at, because in any given group like that, right, you're going to have people who are really excited about AI, who are comfortable with it, who feel maybe intimidated by it or threatened or haven't really touched it and played around with it much. How do you even go about that work? Just because there's a real skill in helping people, teaching people how to use it in a way that's empathetic and compassionate and helpful, right?
Definitely. That's a great question. So we do send a pre-event or pre-workshop survey just to get a sense of what are the main challenges people are facing with AI? What are the different use cases they would like to see? Because we've seen that tailoring the session to exactly what people need is really key. And then that's how they get the most value. And you make a really good point. I think a lot of people are still very skeptical. So they sort of step into these workshops thinking they already have their assumptions about AI. They already think, I've tried it. It's not for me. I've tried it. I haven't had great results. So it's not worth my time. So we usually start our workshops just stating the obvious, or at least attacking these sort of limiting beliefs, anything related to data privacy, to confidentiality, to bias, anything also related to the accuracy you're getting from AI systems. And we're just saying, nothing is perfect at the moment. We're just trying to learn. And here are some best practices to help you just get, better results. And we just start from there, right? We sort of attack, the elephant in the room, or, the more skeptical ideas that we might have about AI. And then we go into sort of best practices, exercises. And that's basically how we get people to align with our thinking.
Yeah, and I think Once the training happens, then it really falls on the organizations and the leaders to manage the change of AI disruption, right? And help shepherd employees through AI adoption. And so I'm curious, like, how do you advise leaders on what that looks like and where to go from there after the workshop is complete?
Yes, we usually try to advise them by, telling them that this is a continuous process. You will still need to sort of update your team on, the different things that are happening in the AI space, or, just the same way tools are sort of adapting and you need to sort of update the software every time. This is something you also need to do inside teams, just making sure that everybody's aware of the rules in place. I think what we see on the opposite side is that when companies sort of make these tools unavailable or don't really, encourage people to use AI tools, people tend to use them privately. And then that's where mistakes usually happen because they don't have the right training on how to use them. So I think it's yes, you're right in terms of accountability. It's up to these organizations to assess sort of the need they might have with AI tools and then train people, but then also continue doing that moving forward. We sometimes have follow-up sessions with some of, the companies and the organizations we work with. So that's usually helpful to sort of step in a few months later after a workshop to see if there's any other concerns or anything we need to talk about. But yes, you're right. I think it's an ongoing process. It's not something just set in stone once and then, we just pray that nobody's going to change the way it's going to make us work. But then, it has to be something that is still happening after the workshop for sure.
Yeah, I imagine you could give a workshop 2.0 like a month or two later just because things are changing so quickly and people have had time to play around, and it's a continuous learning process, right?
No, absolutely. It's something we also have to do as trainers. We also have to keep up with what is going on. There's new tools, new ways of doing things. There's new announcements from different AI tools. So we have to stay updated with what is happening in the space and also how that relates always to the different topics we're focusing on, right? So, public affairs is very different from communications or marketing. So it's something we have to stay updated on for sure.
Yeah. Okay, I want to come back to the use cases and comms that you see for AI and that kind of thing. But I want to hear about your career journey at what your career looked like, before this independent consulting that you're doing.
Absolutely. So I have studied too much. So I've spent many, many years trying to figure out what I wanted to do. So I studied English studies, I did communications, then I did political science. So I have two bachelors in those different fields. And then I decided to confirm everything with a master's in strategic communications. And I really wanted to work in Brussels, in the capital of Europe. So I applied for jobs in that specific city and I got hired in agencies. So my journey in communication started with agencies and it gave me sort of a sense of, the different topics to focus on, the different types of clients. So that was really interesting to me because I stepped into a zone where there was many different things at stake. And especially in Europe, there's a lot of different conversations on sustainability, on transport, mobility. So all these topics were really interesting to me. And after a while, I sort of stepped out of the agency space to focus on what I wanted to do. And I find myself really focusing on communication strategy, on communication efficiency, because that's really something important to me to help communication teams stop being busy all the time and helping them sort of prioritize tasks and think about things more strategically. And then most recently, just focusing on AI as well. So these are the sort of the buckets in which I like to work in. So communication strategy and efficiency, there's AI, and to some extent also LinkedIn, because it really helped me develop my career and meet new people. So these are the sort of the topics I focus on.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it sounds like all of that education really prepared you well to kind of understand the needs of the profession. The reason I got so interested in AI for comms is, to your point, I feel like comms professionals are so busy. Their plates are overloaded oftentimes, especially for small teams, right? That's kind of my comms experience as being on small teams. I just felt like I was constantly getting bogged down by these repetitive, mundane tasks. And, I was like, wow, some of these tools can really help take over some of that, especially like automation tools, right? Approval processes and different things so I'm not having to email each person every single time. And, it's the same chain of emails every single, things that can be automated. And I mean, for me, I just think there really is great potential, and it's already happening now for us to be able to do more of the strategic and creative work that we enjoy and that we're really good at. I don't want to speak on behalf of all comms professionals, but at the same time, everyone I talk to, like, that's the kind of work that lights up comms pros, right? What is your take on that?
Well, definitely. I think you mentioned these different areas which are really key in communications, and these can also be, sort of augmented or accelerated with AI. So the first one is efficiency. So how can we work faster on a specific task, or how can we complete something faster? There's a second point is creativity. So how can we think more broadly? How can we brainstorm more creative ideas? How can we come up with different concepts for events, for, social media posts or anything like that? And I think there's another point that's really even more important than those two is effectiveness. So are we actually working more strategically? Are we focusing on the task that really matters? So before even trying to automate tasks, are these the good tasks we need to be focusing on? Or are these just things that management want us to do, or things that, we've heard in a report, for example, right? And I think in all these buckets, so efficiency, creativity, and effectiveness, AI can just help us do that, right? So in our workshops, sometimes we have these questions where we say, here's a list of tasks that we do on a weekly basis. You're asking a question to AI saying, can you help me understand which tasks are the most important? Or is there something that we're missing in our strategy, or anything in our plan that we need to automate, outsource, or just delete altogether? In terms of efficiency, it's usually just writing, translating, summarizing documents, analyzing documents. And then in creativity is everything I mentioned, sort of brainstorming ideas and thinking more creatively about, our impact. So I think communication, I think we're in the golden age of, AI, because we're starting to use these things and see opportunities on how we can work more effectively, efficiently, and everything. And I think, yes, when we think about these three buckets, so effectiveness, efficiency, and creativity, those are sort of the cornerstones of communications, basically.
Yeah. So, I mean, what does the effectiveness look like, to double click on that? Is it kind of like data analysis and using AI to analyze, okay, where are we most effective? Can you unpack that a little bit, like what that looks like from your perspective?
So to me, effectiveness is everything that is strategic. So any document you might have that tells your strategy, that tells your story as an organization. So you can think of communication strategy documents, you can think of position papers, you can think of anything that sort of has a plan, has a strategy, and using AI to basically either criticize the document to see if there's any flaws in the document, or just to simply improve it. So recommendations on how to improve if you've missed a specific step or anything like that. And I think people usually first use AI to write faster, to write emails, to write blogs, to write social media posts. But I think the benefit of using AI is to really think about more of the strategic thinking, right? So going through all your strategic documents and using AI to sort of question every single point and make sure that by the end of the process, you get a better idea of what sort of activities you should focus on as a team, if these activities could be sort of supported with AI, if there's anything you need to remove from your activities because you just have too much going on and you need sort of a counselor, an AI counselor to help you navigate these things. And yeah, just simply criticizing sometimes some of the assumptions you have when it comes to communications, right? Sometimes we just say, we want to do this event this year. We want to have, one post a day on LinkedIn. We want to be on many different platforms, but is that the right strategy? And I think AI can help us sort of understand or just change that strategy a little bit to make it more impactful.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up, because I think that's kind of how I like to use AI, or where I find it the most useful is finding gaps, finding holes, finding flaws, especially when I'm planning some of my business activities, right? And even just like planning for the midterm or long term for my business, right? And I think some people who are maybe more skeptical of AI would potentially hear that and think, oh my God, like you're using, maybe ChatGPT, a custom GPT to advise you on how to run your business. Like that sounds really risky and not very smart, right? But I find that when I kind of walk people through what this can actually look like from a comms perspective, to your point, beyond generating content, beyond the blog posts, the social media captions, and all of that, people are pretty wowed by it. And I imagine you have a lot of those moments in your workshops, which I would think would be pretty fulfilling.
No, absolutely. I think a lot of people come in the workshops thinking, either they know it all, and as experts, we don't want to know everything. We just stay open to learning. But usually people come in and say, I've tried it, it's not working, or, I've prompted AI many different times and I'm still getting really bad results. So there's nothing this person can actually tell me that's going to convince me. And it's funny to see how that sort of stance shifts towards the end of the workshop, where people just say, I didn't know I could do, or I could use AI to do this. I didn't know AI was going to be my new favorite assistant, right? So I think it could be risky. So we see some issues. Recently, an MEP who used AI for sending a letter to a very high official, and he used AI to sort of create a story, and he had to apologize after using it because it was just, it picked up some lyrics from a specific music band. So it wasn't really the best use of AI. But basically what I'm trying to say is that, people are still accountable for the work we produce, regardless of the tools we use, right? So yes, it could be risky, but I will be the last person making the decision. So it's eventually it's going to be just me who is going to be responsible for the result, right? So it's really using AI in a very safe and ethical way, and reminding that, we're still the humans that are in charge of the results, and also what we do with the results, right? So it's keeping in mind that AI is going to do 80% of the work, and then we are the 20% left that's going to correct, make sure that everything is squeaky clean before it's sent out into the world.
Okay, this is a really good segue into a New York Times opinion piece that I saw today, and I want to just kind of get your thoughts on it. So it's by Samantha Rose Hill, and it's called "Big Tech Wants to Profit from the Loneliness It Helps Cause." And so that's like a big idea, right? It's this idea that, there's a loneliness epidemic. I think, I'm not sure how much people in Europe are talking about that. I hear it in the US all the time, right? There's a loneliness epidemic. People we've seen are now leaning on large language models to basically be replacements for therapists. And one of the quotes from this that I thought was so interesting and that really resonated with me is, it says, unlike human-to-human contact, which involves vulnerability, disappointment, negotiation, and potential rejection, AI gives you what you want, how you want it, when you want it. You never have to apologize, ask for forgiveness, suffer an uncomfortable silence, or wonder what another person is thinking. There's no other, just a reflection of yourself. And then this is, I think, the most interesting part. It says, the danger is not that AI will replace human connection. The danger is that it will make us forget what actual connection requires, while eroding our ability to think for ourselves by training us to depend on AI for the simplest of tasks and interactions. And so I saw this morning, and it really resonated with me because I do see a lot of people talking about the brain rot that can happen when people are so reliant on large language models to figure everything out, right? And so instead of augmenting some of their thinking, it's almost replacing some of it. And I've definitely caught myself in those patterns. What are your thoughts on that? Have you experienced that?
No, definitely. I think there's a lot of conversation about sort of delegating some of the brain work that we have when we're using these AI tools, right? I think this is what the article was mentioning here. And I do agree that there's a certain level of transfer that happens, when we're using these AI tools. We're just delegating some of the tasks that are, creative, challenging, would take us more time to process, which is part of sort of the creative process. But we're now giving this to a system that just creates something in seconds, right? So I think this is an important conversation to have, because especially for the younger generation, because as they're coming into the comms world, they might assume that things just take seconds to create, right? When, back in the days, kind of that usually took a lot of collaboration and meetings and communication, basically, right? What we try to do sometimes in our workshops is that we try to shift the table a little bit and say, if you ask specific questions to AI is going to be very positive and it's going to help you, right? So it's going to be there's not going to be a lot of conflict with AI. But if you create that tension, you can actually get better results. Like, so if you say, here's my position paper or here's my press release, play the devil's advocate and criticize it hardcore. Be brutally honest and tell me where my flaws are. By using prompts like this, you can really push the system a little bit further and just push the system not to be nice because, you need to work a little bit harder on what you're doing. So I think there's two ways of seeing this. It can really help people sort of elevate their game when it comes to creativity. They can brainstorm, they can come up with ideas, they can verify ideas. You can do so much more with AI at the moment, which can actually, I think, exceed the level of brain work, if I may say. But at the same time, yes, a lot of people are going to use it for very mundane tasks. And I think I think we're in control of this technology and we shouldn't be just sidetracked and use it for very simple things, or at least try to push the envelope for using it for more strategic and high level tasks, right?
Yeah, I think that's great. And as I was saying with my business and how I use it, I asked a custom GPT, to basically find gaps in my business strategy and where it thinks I have opportunity for growth. And I was really impressed by what it gave me. And it was a moment of holding up a mirror to myself, and
No, definitely. I think it's a question because we're sort of consultants and we're experts. Sometimes we don't want to rely on another person or another tool to sort of make decisions for us. At least that's what we're thinking. But I think this is part of the journey. We have to learn from these tools. We have to learn from each other. And sometimes if we have to learn it the wrong way or just the tough way, then we have to do it, right? And there's a lot of things we don't want to hear sometimes. When you're asking deeper questions like, am I missing something? Tell me, maybe some of my weaknesses based on the prompts that I provided earlier. There's a lot of things that you can do to sort of have a better understanding of yourself in a way. So I think that's where the tools are really interesting. I sometimes use it to plan better, to organize my work better, to schedule, meetings and do things a little bit faster. Because I'm seeing that I'm just wasting so much time in tasks that are not really impactful, right? So it's really good that you're doing these exercises. I think this is what most people, don't want to do because they're afraid of the answers, right?
Totally. Okay, so let's apply this to comms specifically and helping people understand what some of the use cases could be that are more strategic, right? So I'll share one example and then I'd love to hear some from you, is building a crisis comms simulation in using a large language model, right? So what I mean by that is, say you want to bring your team together for a training around crises and how we might respond, what our processes would be, right? I think a great use case for large language models is basically coming up with the scenarios, coming up with the key audiences, the challenges, basically creating some exercises that the team can then use and take to discuss and explore and unpack and really see where the pain points are. So that's one example. I'd love to hear what some of your favorite use cases are in that vein.
Sure. So when it comes to strategy, I think it all comes to breaking down what a communication strategy is. So thinking about your objectives. Are we focusing on the right objectives? So you can ask AI that. The audience, are we focusing on the right audience? Do we have too many audiences involved in all the activities that we run? The channels, are we on the right channels? Are we reaching the right people? Going through maybe some of your latest social media activity and using AI in your reports to say, these are all the posts that we've produced and here are the results we've got from them. Can you help us assess what we should be focusing on moving forward? It could be about tactics. So thinking more about prioritizing your different activities. So for example, we have an event coming up. We have social media posts. We have press releases. We have media relations with journalists. We have, quarterly meetings with management or with different members. Given all these activities, is there something we're missing? Is there something we should remove? Or is there something we need to delegate or automate? So when you think about strategy, you can take it from many different angles and you can use AI as sort of a counselor or an assistant or a researcher to help you sort of navigate these areas and see basically where you need to stop doing things, where you need to automate and where you need to continue doing things, right? So that's, I think, what usually people miss from using these AI tools. because sometimes they just focus on, write this email or write this press release without even thinking, do we actually need this email? Do we actually need to have these press releases? And I think that's the strategic thinking that has to come in when you're using AI tools.
Yeah, I feel that comms professionals at large want to be data-driven in their decision-making, but also a lot of comms teams really struggle to measure their impact and just to measure things, period, whether it's lack of time or the lack of resources to properly measure. So I love that you really take a high level, I mean that in the best way, like a high level approach to, okay, let's really take a step back and think about how these tools can help us devise the comm strategy and figure out, like, are we doing the right things? I'm hosting an event about the invisible work of comms and how do we measure and message our impact. And I think what you're describing could really help comms professionals do that, because it's all about taking the data you do have and then using a large language model to help you figure out where do we go from here, given the data we have. And I think a lot of comms pros just don't have time to do that themselves.
I think most of us don't have time to do it because we think that a report should be a long document with many different, points and triggers and analyses. And, it doesn't have to be. For me, a report just has to be an email that just summarizes everything that's going on, the main points, and what is the things we need to adjust, basically. That's everything that should be in a report. If your report is 5 pages long and it has different indicators and impressions and engagement rate and the people we reached and everything, it's you're going on all different directions, right? I usually advise my clients to focus on producing one report a quarter. So not a report every week or every month, but just 3 months, because that gives you enough sort of data to analyze. And then obviously you can use AI. You don't have to, but you can use AI to sort of go through all the data and see the trends and see things that you're doing well, things that you're not doing so well, and then basically adjust your stance, right? I don't think reporting should be such a load. It shouldn't, you should spend probably a couple hours every quarter to do a report and adjust, right? You already have your communication strategy, so you already know in which direction you're going. The report is just to make sure that you're still in line with your original plan.
Yeah, that's great. Going back to the workshops, I'm curious what tools you dive into as you're teaching your clients and helping them upskill.
So what we usually do is that we focus on the tools that we use. So it's, the generic tools out there. So the ChatGPTs, the Perplexities, and the Claudes of this world. And sometimes some clients have their own tools. So we sort of align with what tool they have. And so we sometimes provide a prompt and then they use that prompt and then they give us sort of the results of that, just to give a sense of what kind of results they're getting from these tools. But yeah, it's really ranges from video tools to audio tools to summarizing tools, translation tools, but then all the rest of the other tools. So ChatGPT, Perplexity, and Claude usually. And I think what's really important for us is to show the results and show how we can tweak our responses to make sure we get better results from these AI tools. I think most people use AI with very basic prompts, just do this and do that in this style or this format. And the results are usually not great because we're not providing enough context for these tools to understand what we want and how we want it, right? So I think using these tools is good, but the prompting technique is usually what really helps people get better results.
Totally. I was just talking to an old coworker, and she now is working in fundraising for higher ed, and she's trying to tailor some emails and messaging she has for a younger generation of alumni, basically Gen Z, and really wanting to bring them into the community, make them feel welcome, and eventually convert them into regular donors. And she was like, but I'm not getting the results I want. And I was like, okay, well, tell me how you're prompting. And I told her, I think all you need to do is give it a role, right? And I said, you need to tell it, you are a world-renowned messenger for higher ed fundraising efforts, right? Your goal is to convert these Gen Z alums into eventual gift givers, whatever it is. And she was like, you give it a role like that? And I was like, 100% you give it a role like that every time, right? And so I think that bears repeating because it's a really important part of it, to your point. And about about what makes a good prompt.
Absolutely. I think that's a really good way to do it. I think giving a role to AI is great because it sort of constrained the system to think in that specific role. And I think the more constraints you have, the better. I think usually people come up with very broad, very generic ideas. But I think the more specific and the deeper the question, the more precise the answer, right? So I think giving a role is great, providing more context as well. Sometimes we advise people to even meta prompt. So it means you're asking AI to create a prompt that you can then copy and paste, right? So that usually gives you a more detailed prompt with a better understanding of the audience and, all the strategic elements we just talked about. So there's a few tweaks, that people can just apply that can really help get better results. I think it's just a matter of providing more data and sometimes maybe even uploading an email that you think is perfect and saying, use this email as a reference to write another email, right? So it's kind of like, seeing AI as an intern who needs more context for this intern to then produce something, right? If you're just saying, write an email, it's just going to be very broad and very generic email in the end, right? You have to provide more data, provide more information. And that's the only way you get better results with AI.
Yeah, the meta prompting is so effective. Asking the large language model to help you build a really effective prompt is so useful, and a really detailed one that you can copy and paste. Otherwise, that would take like 45 minutes maybe to write it yourself, right? And I think that's great.
Some tasks are just not as useful when you're using AI, right? So usually when it's tasks that don't require a lot of work, this is something that most people can actually do in a couple seconds. So I wouldn't recommend using AI for every single task under the sun. It's mostly for more strategic tasks, things that take a lot more time, and that's where AI can be helpful. But yeah, you're right. I think some tasks we don't require AI for these tasks for sure.
I'm interested, Jacques, when you think about the future of communications and the future of our profession, are there any kind of predictions you have around, say, what our profession will look like in the next 5 to 10 years? Is there anything that keeps you up at night? I'm curious what's on your mind in terms of where our profession is headed with all this.
So with everything happening with AI, I think our profession is going in 2 different directions. So the one direction I want to push people to go into is thinking about doing communication work in a more healthy way. So again, going back to strategy, going back to questioning why we do things and how we can stop being busy in communications all the time, handling so many different tasks that don't actually add much to the impacts we're doing. And so AI can definitely help do that. It can help, small teams actually compete with large teams because of the amount of content, the amount of great ideas they can come up with is really key to sort of compete for attention for, anything when it comes to communications. And then there's the other route where I think most people are going to go into is we're going to use AI. We're going to use more and more of AI. We might hire fewer people because of that. And we might just put more pressure on communication teams because we just assume that now they can just produce more content. They can produce more work, right? So instead of thinking of ways to sort of alleviate sort of the pain they're having in being busy all the time, actually we're just going to try to maximize hours as much as possible instead of maximizing impact, right? So either we're going to be using AI to sort of alleviate that pain and focus on what really matters, or we're just going to accelerate everything and expect even more from communications teams. And so I want to be in that first part. I want to help communications teams stay in that lane. But I fear that, most of the industry is going to go in the other section.
I think about this a lot around how can we promote comms professionals' well-being amidst all of this? Like, how can we use AI to actually make our lives not necessarily easier, but more fulfilling? Again, doing more of the strategic and creative work we enjoy. And I think to your point, that is a huge hazard. And I see that with comms teams all the time. Oh, you're really good at this. You're cranking this out quickly. Like, here's even more work. What else can we do? And I think with AI, that kind of speed of acceleration, if you will, is just going to get faster. And so I think that is a real hazard. I just really appreciate the way you frame that, because I think that's a great way to think about it.
No, definitely. I think that's going to be the main issue for communications team is we can do more in less time. So let's just do more.
Mm.
and spend more time doing more, right? And then, more plus more equals more. And then we're just going to fall into sort of the rabbit hole or the sort of the wheel, right? Sort of we're just continuing doing the same thing, just faster. And we're just doing more of that, right? Without even thinking more strategically. So I think that's going to be one of the biggest issues, because at the same time, we're going to have interns coming into the space and we're going to have to teach them how to do communications the right way. And if the right way is just doing more, then that's going to be potentially an issue. I think it kind of goes back to sort of the issues we've had in education as well, right?
Mm.
We're just focusing on teaching kids or students things that are just not relevant for the world we live in, right? We just focus on having these kids memorize answers instead of asking better questions, right? If you've been to a philosophy class before, you see that, we're even question the question. Like, why are we actually asking this question, right? And I've gained a lot from these courses. And I just see that this is not what we're teaching kids these days, right? We're just teaching them how to do things. And it's been the same for us, but also it's been the same for our parents, right? So it's how do we get this new generation involved in communications while still keeping healthy and more organized and just more strategic? Because yes, we can do more with AI, but we can do more harm as well, right?
Yeah, you're dropping a lot of wisdom, Jacques, especially in the age of AI. Like, the critical thinking is so important. Having the critical thinking skills to question the outputs from an AI tool, that is a really important skill. And thinking about, where to even apply it and where it can be most useful and beneficial for our work, right?
No, definitely. I think when you think about sort of the human contribution when we're using these tools, it usually focuses on the things that a tool can't really replicate, or at least is not as good as humans at replicating at the moment, let's say. So anything related to creative thinking, critical thinking, empathy, all the soft skills that make us human, right? And these are usually the things that we enjoy doing on a daily basis in our work, right? And so I think I did this exercise a couple of months ago, asking myself, I'm going to list everything I do on a weekly basis. So writing emails, reaching out to clients, doing workshops, preparing workshops. And I had a column on the side saying, is it draining you, or are you gaining energy from this task, right? For all the tasks that are draining me, can AI help me do that? And I think for most of them, yes. So this is where our attention should be, instead of thinking that, AI should just be everywhere. I think AI should first take care of the tasks that are time consuming and don't provide much value, and then slowly going to the tasks that actually need more of our input, right? So it's a dance between us and AI to make sure that we're focusing on the right things. And yeah, hopefully more people get to do that. But it's a struggle, because so many different AI tools, we're busy all the time. We have so many different social media platforms and people are creating them every day. So it's just difficult. Our space is just very challenging at the moment.
I love that exercise. I'm going to try that with the column. I think that's a really smart way to audit your work and see how AI could support it. And to your point about the empathy and all of that, I think that is a big part of this idea of invisible communications work. I find that so much of our work is around relationship building and listening and all of these things that are I think at this point kind of strictly human skills, right? And these soft skills that you're talking about, compassion and connecting dots based on different conversations you're having and that kind of thing. So I think it's a good reminder for comms professionals that we really still have such an important role, because I do find that generally comms professionals are great relationship builders, have a lot of empathy, can listen really well, and that's like what makes them so good at the work. Yeah. So there's not really a question there, but I just relate to what you're saying.
No, I fully agree. I think listening is a key skill, but it's there's definitely these soft skills that we continue to be using in communications that, AI hasn't really a step in. And this is what makes our work even more valuable. So maybe asking ourselves, how can we use AI to do the things that we don't want to do? And so we can spend more time doing the things we want to do as a team. So collaborate, brainstorm, listen to each other, maybe spend fewer, minutes in meetings, because meetings are draining, for me at least. Mm-hmm. But then how can we use that time for something that actually moves the needle or helps the team or makes us more human in a way, right? I I personally think AI is going to make us more human, but we just have to understand that. We just have to understand that we have to focus on what is really impactful for us, and then have AI do the rest, kind of.
Yeah, something that came out of the first event in the Comms and AI webinar series I did, it's this lesson that I keep repeating to myself and in conversations I'm having, and it's how important it is right now to understand what you value and also the value that you bring. And using the answers to those two questions as your North Star, as you're navigating all of this chaos. Knowing, okay, where is the red line for you in terms of, I'm not comfortable using AI for this, or even just generally, I'm not comfortable with putting this message out that's completely against my values, right? So it's knowing what you value and then the value you bring. What are the soft skills that you have that can't be replaced? So that's something I think a lot about, is kind of like these guiding principles and the answers to those two questions. And I think to your point, it's important to do some kind of reflective work around that to help guide us through this moment.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's not easy work, because now you're stepping into, questioning and values and sort of strategic thinking, which is sometimes very difficult to sort of materialize or visualize. It's usually easier to just say, we'll just run a campaign. But if it's, we have to think through our strategic output or, our values, that's a lot more of a deep exploration, right? So it's more difficult to put together. But I think that's the role that AI is playing, right? It's making us rethink what is possible, because now we can do research in seconds. We can confirm ideas in seconds. So now everything is technically possible, right? We can create whatever we want. So now it's about figuring out what we actually want to create instead of just creating random things, right? And I think that can be a difficult idea. I think we sort of had that idea before when we started using Google the first few times, because we were thinking we have a blank page in front of us and we can ask whatever question and get whatever answer. And I think it was just very overwhelming, because we were thinking, I basically have access to all human knowledge. I don't know what to even ask, right? But I think it's asking these questions, having a conversation with AI, and clarifying our goals, what we actually want to do now that we have all this leverage, right? And I think that's the most powerful exercise you could be doing in communications.
Yeah, I think when Google was really becoming more popular, I probably would have searched something like, okay, how many marbles can you fit in your average size swimming pool or something, right? But it's like, okay, how useful actually is that? So yeah, there's a real intentionality that needs to happen. And it really is an important moment, I think, and a good opportunity for comms pros to think about how we can go about our work in a way that's fulfilling and strategic and all the things. Jacques, I could keep talking with you about this stuff for a long time, but I want to make sure you have time to talk about how people can find you and your work and reach out if they're interested in trainings for themselves or their team or whatever.
Absolutely. So you can just find my name on LinkedIn, so Jacques Foul, or you can find us on Influence Builders. It's the website we have with all the different information and resources. We have AI tools for public affairs and communications on the website, but usually just LinkedIn is fine to reach out. I try to post ideas about AI and things like that every week. So if you want to join the conversation, feel free. And yeah, I'm happy to support you in any way, and happy to continue conversation about AI. I think it's going to be very interesting to see what happens in the next few months and years.
Thank you so much. This was really awesome. And we didn't prepare ahead of time for this at all. And I know I kind of went every which direction. I really appreciate you going with it. And I learned a lot. I think this was great. So talk about energizing work. This definitely was energizing for me. So I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.